jazzy.
I know. It's very 1920s-esque.
Right?
Yeah.
Right? I feel like I should have it like a gin or some sort of, bootleg liquor beside me when we do this. All right, so we're back at Step Into the Story Writer's Room. It's our 5th episode and our first episode of 2023, which is super exciting because this year you and I are going to be doing sort of a series where we take people from start to finish through a novel. So this week we're going to talk, or this month we're going to talk planning and research. I'm Donna Allward for those of you who are new, and this is my co-host, Barbara Tanner-Wallace.
Hello.
All right, so the more you and I do these segments, which is kind of funny, we realize that we don't think alike. And our processes are radically different, which I think is a really good thing because it shows that there's no one way to do anything, and people's brains work differently and people's processes are different. So when we give advice, it's more take what works for you and apply it rather than there being any one way to do anything. So we're kind of hoping that throughout these episodes, we end up giving our viewers really good information, as much as we can in 30 minutes. And then, they can take it and apply it to their particular situation. So, because we only have 30 minutes, without further ado, we bring 5 steps to planning your novel. I'll let you kick it off, Barb.
All right. Look, before you start writing, you got to do some work. It doesn't matter if you're a pantser or a plotter. Trust me, this is the one thing I will say is kind of an absolute. It doesn't work to just sit down and blindly start typing. You got to know something about your story. And that is actually the step 1. Identify what your story is. What is it you want to tell? I'm going to throw a caveat straight. I'm going to go back because I want to throw another caveat in. Some people start with character. Some people start with plot. Some people start with research. So we're going to go through these steps. You can mix and mingle them however you want. The only truism, like I said, is you're not going to be able to sit down and do it blindly. You need to know something. So again, what story do you want to tell? Do you have an idea, a theme that you want to talk about? Do you have a plot that you want to talk about? Do you know what genre you're writing? Is it going to be literary? Is it going to be more of a commercial fiction, science fiction, mystery? Who's your audience? Are you writing for young adult? Or are you writing for older people? Are you the best person to tell the story? That's a lot of times people will come up with a great idea and it's not necessarily their story to tell. If it's something that they really want to talk about and it's not their story, do you know a co-writer that could help you with that and could bring depth and understanding to parts of the story that you couldn't? That's basically the starting point for me, is just knowing kind of an idea of my plot.
Perfect. Yep. So once you do that, one of the things that you really should do is find out your characters. And of course, we're giving these in steps 1 through 5, but they don't necessarily have to be in order. I do find that finding your characters and sorting that out is probably my first step after identifying, what story is I want to tell. Characters are the heart of every story. And even if you are a plotter and you're very plot heavy, it's still your character's decisions that drive that plot. So figuring out who they are and really delving into what drives them is really important. And we're going to do a whole episode on character development. But at least having a good GMC, which is goal, motivation, and conflict, for your protagonist and your antagonist as well. Villains need to be well-rounded as well. Mm-hmm. And so some of the ways that you can do this are you can simply sit down and just start writing what you know about your character, what they want, why they can't have it, why they want it. You might conduct character interviews. I know a lot of people have done this, which is actually kind of fun. It's not my method, but people have done that. Or you can use a character worksheet. So, and that's what I do. I have a character template that I fill out, and even the small questions just sort of give me a better understanding of. It's funny how a little detail can be so key to a character. And then you also figure out what backstory they have that has shaped them into who they are. And this doesn't mean that you're going to know everything about them. You'll discover things as you go along, and hopefully they'll surprise you too. I find it's always like finding a little gem when my surprise me with something. But having a good handle on them before you start writing chapter 1 is, I think, a really good place to start.
One of my favorite exercises is actually by Donald Moss, and he has you write a scene that was pivotal in your character's life, in their childhood, or a memory from a long time ago. You may never even use that scene ever, but it's a good way to get into the psychology of them, to understand what their core pain was, what drives them, what lesson they need to learn, what baggage they're carrying with them. I find that one's one of my favorites because I like to have characters that have a lot of baggage. So
then the story just kind of writes itself, right?
That's it. So but you'd like to know where that baggage came from.
Yeah.
And it's a great way to kind of figure out, like, oh, why is he so scarred? What's a good way to illustrate this without saying his mother and he had a very traumatic relationship? Give me a scene, and you may never use it, but you'll have a real understanding of where the pain came from.
Well, and it's funny because when I do my character worksheet, I fill everything out, and then I actually put it away, and I probably never look at it again.
Me too.
Right? But that's okay. That's okay, because you still have that internal handle on who they are. And if you really want to, you can refer back to it. But a lot of the time, it's just so I can get to know them on the more than on the surface, but then enough that as we go through the story, then they can show me who they are, in addition to what I've already, you sort of set that foundation.
Right. And almost always they will show you little details that you had no idea about. Suddenly you'll be on 150 and go, oh, I didn't know her mother was the town hoe. It's like,
that's a good theme
but then suddenly it fits in the story because it comes out. And the characters do. I mean, it's an old joke that the characters kind of tell the story in your head and just you write through them, but they kind of do.
Right. You're just the conduit. That's it. All right. Then the third thing that
my favorite is research. I am a lover of arcane facts and trivial information that has no value whatsoever. So this is my favorite step in the process. I'm not joking. My husband says that I have like this great gift for useless information, and that my greatest skill will be going to a trivia night. But so it is very easy to go down rabbit holes. I can tell you that right now. You want to focus your initial research on the heart or the focus of your story. If your story is the stuff that you really need to know. Like if your story is a police procedural, you better brush up on your crime and punishment research. Or if it's a murder and you have notes about the murder, you want to know about crime scenes. You want to know how blood spatter works, things like that. If you're writing about a specific event, you want to, like Donna anchored her book by the Halifax explosion.
Yeah.
Clearly that's going to be the most important thing to research. I like to anchor mine frequently to an event or to some sort of place or thing that happened as well. I don't know my next story yet. I know it's in the 1920s. So I'm going to do a lot of reading about flappers and speakeasies and the Ziegfeld Follies and kind of come up with where my anchor is. And then once I know it, I'll do more research.
Right.
The number one rule when researching a book is to do it. You do not assume, you know the answer. You may think, for example, crime scenes because you watched a lot of CSI, but guess what? They're not always right or accurate. So you need to do the research and verify it. The second rule, I said before, do not let the research rabbit holes take you over. It is very, very easy to go in to want to look up one thing, like what perfume was popular in 1972 because your heroine was going to buy it. And the next thing you know, an hour and a half has gone by and you're looking at vintage ads and trying to figure out language and going, oh, look at that bottle that I never knew existed in such and such a time. It's really easy to suddenly eat it all up.
I've never done that.
Everybody's done that.
My nose growing.
That's why if you're like me and like can't absorb enough stupid information, Like,
Yeah.
oh my God, you mean a dog won a medal in World War II? I must now read this article. So,
Right. Right.
and trust me, that's what you do. But so there's this great article on a website called Pork and Dagger. I'll leave it the link in the when we put in the story notes or in the show notes.
Yeah.
Because he talks about researching science fiction if you don't have a science background, which was really interesting, but I thought the steps worked for just about everybody. The different ways that you can do research, whether it's shadowing somebody, interviewing somebody, researching through books, reading diaries, whatever. There's a lot of different resources. And again, it can suck you in, but do the research.
Yeah. Renee Ryan put me on to a great site called newspapers.com.
Oh, I love
So when
this.
I was looking for specific stuff at a certain time period in the explosion, and honestly, part of it was what they would see in the newspaper. I was actually able to go in and look at that and do like a word search, the time period, the place, and it was super great. It is a paid for subscription, but like that's one of my best tools for looking for pertinent information right in a very detailed time period. The other thing that you mentioned in your last broadcast with Serena Burdick was reading fiction in the time period in which you're planning to set your book. And that's one of my favorites because sometimes that really gives you flavor and the little details that go beyond the historical facts, but more sort of slice of life kind of thing. So I love that advice from her.
My final piece of advice for research would be think of it as an inverted triangle. Start wide and then move in narrow. Because a lot of the little nitty gritty things you're not going to know until you're absolutely in the book. But you want to start with the broadest pieces of information possible first, like what it is like in the time period, what it's like, the science fiction information you need about space travel, whatever, and then whittle it down as you go along.
Agree. All right, so I'm going to take that slide down. I'm going to bring, hopefully, this one up. All right, step 4, pantser or plotter. This is one of my favorite things because in romance world, which you and I have been in for a long time, I'm very much a pantser. I will have a basic idea, and I may or may not do a character worksheet, and I start chapter 1 and just start typing. I can't do that in historical fiction. So I've actually, out of necessity, become way more of a plotter. So I tend to have a grasp on my characters, the hook that's driving the story. I find overplotting hinders me in that I try to adhere too much to that plot that I've laid out, and it sometimes stifles the creativity or prevents me from seeing those little magical moments where characters reveal things to me. So I try not to overplot, but it really, like, other people really love having a detailed plot, like outline or however they set that up. So this is basically whatever works for the way your brain works, the way your process works. So it doesn't matter if you're a pantser or a plotter. You still have to have, in my opinion, some idea of, again, what your story's about, who your characters are, and probably 3 or 4 turning points, like major turning points, and how the story is going to end. I also think you should know how many points of view you're going to have, so who the main characters are and the lens that you're going to tell the story through, the lens through which you're going to tell the story. Let's be grammatically correct. And also the tense. So is it going to be first person, third person, how you're going to write that? I think having those nailed down before you write chapter 1 at the top of your page are probably a really good idea. And you can do it in, like, some people do a detailed synopsis, and that's how they work everything out. Some people do a chapter by chapter outline, and we'll do like what this turning point is, and we're going to talk about structure again in another episode and how they do that. Some people use sticky notes and with different colors. So I know Julie Cohen does that with hers, and she does a whole, I think, workshop on how to use sticky notes to plot your novel. It's really just knowing the story you want to tell and how you want to tell it, and having that sort of foundation before you start.
I think my caveat with that would be the more complex story you're going to tell, the more advanced plotting and work you need to do. Because if you have multiple pieces and multiple threads going on at the same time, you need to keep track of all of them. And it's very hard when you're pantsing and just whipping the story out to remember that these things are going to cross at a certain point or these two people intersect. So if the more moving pieces you have, the more you need to keep kind of at least know how those stories are going to work together.
And how they fit together. I guess the other thing too is it depends on if, and we touched on this I think last time. So you have two timelines or 2 points of view. Mm-hmm. Do you write them both separately and then find the intersecting points to bring them together? Or do you alternate chapters for different points of view? So, I mean, these are decisions you can make too, and also trial and error. So you might decide that you want to do one point of view and then the next chapter, the next one. And you get 5 or 6 chapters in and realize that for the pacing or whatever, it's not working. So you change it, right? But making those sorts of decisions are important.
They are. I tend to do it in chunks. Which is not necessarily the best way to do it, but it is the way my mind works. Is if I try to plot the whole book out at once, I can't. I will get stuck trying to force the story to an outline.
Right.
And sometimes when that happens, what you have is characters forcing into action that doesn't work.
Right.
You know, like I frequently, when I'm critiquing someone, will say, well, why did they do that? And they're like, well, because that's what they're supposed to do in the story. It's like, but it didn't work. I know. I'm sorry that you had that in your outline.
They can't just do it because that's what you want to happen. Right. It has to come from the character, right?
Exactly. But the story that I just finished got a lot of moving pieces, so I couldn't not plot anything. But I tend to do it in chunks. Like, okay, here's the first quarter. I work in a 3-act structure, which we'll talk about. But here's the first half, the second half. Here's the first third. And I break it into chunks. Yeah. So I hit my main points. But it's much more pantsing than I thought it would be because the characters told the story, and that's why I don't like to tightly plot. Other people, though, like you said, swear by it. But I find if you go so much chunk, then you suddenly realize what's happening in the next chunk. You don't always see the future until you get there.
Right. The funny thing is, when the worst but best revisions I ever had from an editor, if the book needed so many changes that we broke it into chunks, and it was a 400-page book, and we broke it into like the first 100. And then the next 100. And then I did the final 200 because the first half of the book was then at that point so solid that I could take that and it was fine. But we really did break it into chunks because looking at the whole 400-page book was too overwhelming. But again, that works for you. And really that takes us into our 5th point.
Where we differ.
Right, which is how you organize your pre-work. So for me, I would do, in romance land, when I'm writing 50,000 word short contemporaries, I would usually send maybe a page to my editor with a character sketch, a basic premise of the story, just the basic sort of hooks and tropes, and away I go. But again, writing 100,000 word, twice that length historical fiction is very different. Because you have to take into account historical facts, different timelines, varying points of view, a bigger cast of characters, bigger arcs. And so, yes, as I said before, this dedicated pantser has become a bit of a plotter. And so, appropriately enough, the way that I generally organize my pre-work now is through an app called Plotter. So it sounds, also put it in the show notes, but it's spelled like plotter without the E before the R at the end. So Plottr. And I'm a very visual person, so I like it because I can set up timelines for each of my characters. And I can also set up a historical timeline, and then I can look and actually see where those points are intersecting. So I find that very helpful for me. Scrivener is also really popular for that. I haven't used it, but I know a lot of people have. And some people use spreadsheets like Excel or do a story Bible in Word, whatever. I just like to have something searchable so that I'm not like having to go through and read a whole bunch of stuff looking for that one little tidbit I know I researched and wrote down, but now I can't find it. So I like to have something that's searchable. But this is one of those times where it really becomes clear that you and I do things very differently. So why don't you tell everyone how you organize your material, Barb?
Okay, then there's me. I am an anti-organizer. Let us put this out there right now. This has actually been a problem my entire life. Like I said, I am the lover of arcane knowledge. I also have a very good memory. And as a result, I relied on my memory for most things a long time, which is not the best method. But,
not a very good filing system, Barb.
Right. I actually used to have nightmares like, oh my God, if I were to die on my way to work, they would never be able to find anything because it's all in my head. But so I'm not a huge fan of programs. I have Plotter. I have used it. I do it to kind of organize myself a little bit, but I'm not super fond of it. I think it'll be really useful on revisions because then I can make sure that my timelines hit when they're supposed to. But I am old school. I take a notebook and I just start writing stuff out. I hand sketch my 3-act structure. Sometimes I write it on a whiteboard so I can see it, where I can see the hitting points. But everything is just written down, all my character inputs. And then I will go back maybe 2 or 3 chapters in and do it again and write out the 3-act structure. As far as my research, I do a lot of it, and I have a lot of things bookmarked on my computer. I have a notebook for research. I print stuff out, I put it in it, and then forget it's there. So then I go back online to look for the same articles again, and then bookmark them again. So the hot mess method is not what I recommend, but the reason we're laughing at me, but the reason I'm telling you all about it is because I know people, like I would break out in hives trying to match Donna's organization. Donna is incredibly organized. She's very good at it. She is, the exhibit A of how you're supposed to do things. And then there's people who just can't. My brain does not do that. I'm married to an engineer who does do it. So I know, you go in his closet, all the shirts look perfect. And then there's, I put it up wherever. It still works for me. I mean, it's a little bit extra steps at the end because I have to go back and make sure that I didn't screw anything up, and I have to go gather all my research, and there's usually some anxiety attached to it. But it can be done much more old school. You don't need the programs that we're all talking about. It can just be a notebook and a pen and a pencil and just writing and writing and writing.
Well, and to be fair, that works for you. Mm-hmm. And you also write a lot longhand.
I do a lot of
longhand. I can't, because I can't write as fast as my brain wants me to go. And there's just something that happens between my fingers and then my eyes and the monitor. So, and I type very quickly. So for me, handwriting things out doesn't work. But I know tons of writers who write longhand and then input it in. So again, it's whatever works for you. And I think maybe the big lesson here is do pre-work and know yourself.
Yes.
Right? And know and try new things. And if they don't work, then that's fine. Go with what works. Just make sure you have some sort of a foundation with these things that we've brought up. So
I think the real bottom line is we'll go all the way back to you're doing all this stuff because we said you try to sit down and just say, I'm going to write a book. And then you start pounding away and you'll get the chapter. Maybe you'll get the first chapter done or you get the first couple chapters. And then you'll be like, I don't know what I'm doing and I don't know what's going on. And you lose interest or you just can't figure it out. My boss years ago started a book after I had published a couple and she wrote me a note and she's like, wow, it's a lot harder than I thought because I got to chapter 2 and I couldn't think of what to write next. And so what we're trying to tell you is just do enough so that you have an idea where you're going and you won't give up halfway through.
Right. And if you feel like you need to, really dig deep and do a big outline, then that's fine. But if you don't, that's fine too. I agree with you. So that leads us into the final slide, which is get to work. So you can only delay for so long.
Right.
Um,
You
so
can
how do you know when it's time, Barb?
What's that?
How do you know when it's time to stop planning and researching?
Usually it's because I'm getting impatient to start the story. And that's a whole nother process that we can chat about another day. But usually it's because I'm getting really impatient to just move forward with it. You know, you get to a point where you've read everything you need to read, the story's gelling, and you're excited to put it on paper. You know the characters, and you jump ahead to go to work. And I noticed that my pre-writing has gotten shorter and shorter and shorter the more books I do.
Nice.
But I think that's because I know I can go back and fix things, and I know my process.
Right.
So yeah, the minute you get really excited to get these characters moving, I say is when you're ready to go.
So I'm going to come at it from the opposite perspective, which when you get to the point of your research and your planning, and you know it's time to start chapter 1, and you have that writer's resistance thing because you're afraid for whatever reason to get started. So, which is me actually, and for all my apparent organizational abilities, this is something that I struggle with. I will procrastinate because I'm afraid of a lot of things. So I suggest giving yourself a timeline, like 2 months maybe. And that sounds like a lot of time, but if you're reading, 10 or 15 books and then doing online research and then somehow organizing that, and 2 months really isn't that long. So, but whatever your time is, make a time that you're going to say, okay, that's it. I'm done. I'm going to start after 8 weeks of doing research, and then stick to it. Because once you start writing, you're never going to have all of your research done the moment you sit down to start writing. You're always going to be going through and then realizing there's something you don't know, or a little tidbit that you want to look at, or your characters lead you in a direction, which means you're going to have to go check something out. So don't think you're going to have it all done.
I mean, I know a number of writers who do the same thing I do. Excuse me while I choke on water. Which is we get 100 pages in and realize we're telling a different story.
Yeah. Or I got 100 pages in and I took out an entire timeline and character.
Yeah, I did the same thing.
So things will change and fluctuate, and you'll decide to take things in possibly a different direction, and maybe you won't. But even if you don't, there's still inevitably, as you dig deeper into the story, there will be details that you'll have to go look for. So don't think that you're going to get all of that down before you hit chapter 1. Set a time, and when that time comes, make yourself sit your butt in the chair and start writing.
Yep.
I think that would be my advice, because we could fall into the excuse of, but I'm planning and researching forever.
Oh, I've met writers that are.
Right. So at some point you have to pull the pin on all the research and stuff and actually get to the story. That's what you're really supposed to be doing. So, all right. So that's our tips for planning and research. And we hope you'll come back on February 28th, because what are we talking about? Oh, plotting and story structure.
That's my favorite.
It's Barb's favorite and not mine. And this is where my pantser personality will come out. So it'll, again, be a little bit of yin and yang with us, with our processes, which is good. You get two sides of the same coin. So what do we have coming up next for our next broadcast?
Well, I'm going to be doing my monthly book reviews on February 3rd.
Perfect.
And then on February 7th, we're going to be talking about Gabriella Saab's Daughters of Victory, which I started last week. It's very gritty. It's a really different take on, because it's going to go from the Russian Revolution through World War II. And I'm learning a lot about Russia that I never knew. I got to say, her research is amazing. I mean, the details that she knows, I was like, you think she lived in Russia in 1910. It's so immersive. And then we have do we have a feature author this month? Next month?
That is TBD.
Ooh, it's going to be a mystery.
It is going to be a mystery.
But
we do have something else coming up in February that's going to be fun.
That would be we're going to be together. So we're going to be doing a little surprise broadcast from Halifax, Nova Scotia. And we'll see what kind of shenanigans we get into.
It's gonna be fun. Gabriella's book, by the way, just releases today, the 24th.
Oh, then go get it so you can read it. So we can all talk about it. Because I would love
to read with us. It has shipped to me, so I will be getting it tomorrow. And yeah, so join us on the
fabulous writer. I can tell you that just from being like maybe 100 pages in. Fabulous.
Right. Perfect. Yeah. All right. Well, I think that does it for us this week.
It does. Go out and my Daughters of Victory. Do some pre-work on your books. Get out there and start writing out character sketches and taking notes and deciding what you want to write. And we'll be back next month to talk about 3-act structure and plot and all that.
All right.